If you have your Bibles, open to Psalm 40. We'll jump back into our series going through the Psalms, sort of hand-picking one for this close of 2019, immediately following Christmas. So this is Psalm 40, verses 1 through 17. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after a lie. You've multiplied, O Lord, my God, your wondrous deeds and your thoughts towards us. None can compare with you. I will proclaim and tell of them. Yet they are more than can be told. In sacrifice and offering you have not delighted, but you have given me an open ear. Burnt offering and sin offering you have not required. Then I said, behold, I have come. In my scroll of the book it is written of me, I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is written within my heart. I have told the glad news of deliverance in the great congregation. Behold, I have not restrained my lips, as you know, O Lord. I have not hidden your deliverance within my heart. I have spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I have not concealed your steadfast love and your faithfulness from the great congregation. As for you, O Lord, you will not restrain your mercy from me. Your steadfast love and your faithfulness will ever preserve me. For evils have encompassed me beyond number. My iniquities have overtaken me, and I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head. My heart fails me. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let those be put to shame and disappointed altogether who seek to snatch away my life. Let those who turn back and brought to dishonor, who delight in my hurt. Let those be appalled because of their shame, who say to me, aha, aha. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation say continually, great is the Lord. As for me, I am poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought for me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, O my God. Pray with me. Father, we thank you for the word that you've given us. We thank you for the powerful truths that are in this psalm, in this poem, in this song that we should have on our minds and on our hearts, and we should be singing daily. I pray that now as we dig into this, that you would guide our thoughts, that you would push us towards actions and towards a life that is lived fully for you. We pray that right now my words would be yours. In your name we pray. Amen. In Genesis chapter 9, you see the end of the account of this horrible flood that God sends on the planet because of our sin. He wipes the face of the earth, essentially hitting the restart button and starting over. And then at the end, the ark lands, Moses and his family come out, and God makes a covenant, a promise with them. He promises them that they don't need to be afraid. They don't need to fear that every time they make God angry, he's going to come and send another one of these floods. He promises, I will never do this again. I will never flood the earth in this way again. And as a sign of that promise, he puts a rainbow in the sky so that every time we see this rainbow, we can remember we have a good and loving God. He is just. He brings justice, and sometimes that comes with vengeance. But we don't have to fear that he's just going to instantly wipe us off the map every time we mess up. He grants grace. A little while later in Genesis, we run into a couple of characters, one by the name of Abram, one by the name of Jacob. Both of these men received the same promise, Jacob being Abram's grandson. The promise is from their family, from them, will come a mighty nation. And each of them, he gives a symbol of that promise, that symbol being a changed name. Abram has his name changed to Abraham. Jacob has his name changed to Israel. So that every single time somebody speaks their name, they can remember the promise that God gives to them. Every time. Jumping ahead, Exodus chapter 12. God commands Moses and Aaron to literally set the calendar of the nation of Israel around a celebration. That celebration would be called Passover, where they remember what had just happened to them a few weeks before. This horrible scene where the spirit of death comes in as a plague into Egypt, so that God's people could be freed from slavery. And that they would remember that continually from that day forward. Joshua 4 has a story that I love this story. At the end of the Exodus, they're about to begin the conquest of Canaan. And Joshua brings the army right up to the Jordan River. And it's this great big river, compared to the Mississippi. And they've got to try and get a couple million people across this river. Without bridges, without boats. How are they going to do it? God says, trust me. And he marches them up with the Ark of the Covenant. He drives up the river. They march across on dry ground. But as they're doing that, he gives a command. He says, each leader of a tribe of Israel pick up a boulder from the middle of the river, from a place where they couldn't otherwise be if it weren't for God's hand, and carry it the rest of the way across the river. When you're across the river, stack it in a monument. And this is what it says in Joshua chapter 4, verse 6. When your children ask in time to come, what do those stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. They made a monument to remind them of this incredible act that God made to start the foundation of the nation of Israel. Jumping ahead again, in 166 BC, Israel is under control of the Syrians who had taken over for the Greeks and Alexander the Great. And Antiochus Epiphanes, the leader of the Syrian army, had desecrated the temple. He had come in, put an altar either to himself or to Zeus, and slaughtered a pig on the altar in the temple. Completely desecrated. Worship can no longer take place in that temple. Judah Maccabee leads a revolt. They run the Syrians out. Israel reestablishes itself as an independent sovereign nation. And they begin the process of cleansing the temple, of making the temple again holy and available to worship. But there was a problem in the midst of this, in the temple, because of the horrors of the war. There was only enough oil to keep the lamps lit for one night. But miraculously, those lamps stayed lit for 8 days straight, fulfilling the purification of the temple. From that day forward, that moment, that miracle has been celebrated by the Jewish people in the celebration of Hanukkah. Luke 22, Jesus is gathered together with his disciples, celebrating the Passover, as every Jew had since the time of Moses. But in the midst of that, he takes a moment and lifts up a piece of the bread. And he says, take and eat each time you're together in remembrance of me. And then he lifts up the glass of wine and he says, take and drink. This is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me. Instituting what we continue to celebrate today as the Lord's Supper. In a bit of a different category, but along the same lines, and again skipping ahead a bunch of years, on July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress declared that the 13 American colonies would no longer be under the rule of Great Britain. They would be 13 independently operating states united together in a union. Beginning the year after that, in 1777, we've celebrated that date as Independence Day. Now, what do all these different ideas tie together as? Well, obviously, they're all celebrations, or they're monuments, or they're memorials that are set up for different people and different events. And we have thousands of these. Everywhere we go, just outside of town, we have a monument remembering an event that I think several of you remember from a number of years ago. These monuments and these memorials we set up take a lot of different forms. They look different. They act different. Some of them are solemn. Some of them are celebratory. Sometimes we grieve in the midst of them, but they're all there for the same reason, so that we remember, so that we don't forget what happened. And we need these things because we do tend to forget. This is why I say repeatedly that I have never really understood that, because it gives us the opportunity not only to learn from our past mistakes, but learn from other people's past mistakes. I make enough mistakes on my own. If any help I can get in avoiding future ones is great. But it shows us where we've been. It shows us mistakes we've had. And by doing that, we can avoid mistakes in the future. We can maximize our potential for who we were created to be because we've learned from what's come before us. And I think a symbol of the importance of history is the effort that you see all around us now, and really this has gone on throughout all of human history, the effort to wipe out certain aspects of history or to change history according to a certain perspective. One example of this is this growing, unfortunate movement of Holocaust deniers. People who claim that the Holocaust never happened. Well, there's a lot of different people who claim that for a lot of different reasons according to them. But one consistency that you'll see across the board in people who deny the Holocaust are that they are not necessarily particularly large fans of the nation of Israel. It's a movement that is completely driven by anti-Semitism. And in order to try and support their hatred of Jews and the nation of Israel, they want to wipe off the face of the earth this event that was the spark for the recreation of the nation of Israel. So remembering important past events is important to us as individuals, as it is to nations and to cultures. We need to remember not only what God did in the big picture, but what has God done for me in my life? When are those moments that He's carried me through a trial, through a struggle, through a difficulty, through a situation that I didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but He still carried through? And that's what David is doing here in this psalm. I wanted to jump ahead to this, as I said, right after Christmas, because I think the message of the psalm lines up with what our focus should be coming out of a holiday like Christmas, ending out 2019 and marching into what God has in store for us in 2020. As a structure, this psalm can be laid out in a bit of a pattern. If you're familiar with patterning songs or poems in sort of an ABC form, for example, in a song, oftentimes you'll have a verse, a bridge, and a chorus. You'll sometimes call that A, part B, part C. This lays out, I think, in a format that we'll see A, B, C, C, B, A. So it'll start in a theme, it'll go to a second theme, a third theme, then it'll repeat that third theme, go back to a second and a first. If that makes any sense to you. If I'm getting blank looks from Barry here, that's okay. There's no hope for Keith following this, that's okay. We'll start out with this first of these three parts that we see right away in verse 1 and part of verse 2. The first theme of waiting. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog. Now this theme of waiting isn't just simply waiting. It's waiting in distress, in despair, waiting as we struggle, as we feel like there's no hope. This is a desperate situation. Verse 2 sort of highlights this idea out of the pit of destruction. That Hebrew word destruction there sort of has this idea of noise and chaos and destruction all around and surrounding us. This pit, this bog, this mud, this clay. It sort of reminds us of a story that would happen about 400 years after David writes this, where David starts the city of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. It's the end of its time as capital, at least before the exile when Babylon comes in and is about to destroy the city. The prophet Jeremiah stands up and is prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem as a punishment for the sins of Israel. The king wasn't really having it. He and Jeremiah didn't get along great, so he has Jeremiah thrown into a well with no water. It's not a completely dry well, though. As he hits the bottom, it's muddy, and you can just imagine that mud, the sediment that's built up in a well over generations, just slowly sucks Jeremiah in. And he sits there waiting to either starve to death or to die of dehydration. Sometimes things get bad like that, where we feel lost in the dark, struggling through these difficulties, unsure of what's going to happen. And in the midst of that, we have to wait. We wait for the Lord. More than that, we wait patiently. Because sometimes God takes time to come to our aid. God saves Jeremiah from that well, but not right away. It takes time. He had to wait. We don't know when, and we don't know how God is going to show up. But He is going to show up. So we wait while we sink deeper. We wait while we see things get worse. We wait. We see this first section is paralleled in verses 13 to 15. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste and help me. Let those be put to shame and disappointed altogether who seek to snatch away my life. So we're waiting and we're begging God to deliver us, and we're asking God, do it soon. We're being attacked. We see this theme that comes up over and over again with David, that his enemies surround him and try and kick him when he's down. When he's already struggling, they start to pile on. But he continues to wait patiently. And he's waiting for the second theme in this psalm, the theme of deliverance. He knows God is going to bring it. He knows that he's going to eventually be lifted out of the miry bog and set back upon a rock, making my steps secure, back on that firm foundation. We know that deliverance is coming. We wait patiently knowing that until it's finally here. Because we've been promised deliverance from hopelessness and from despair. Getting there was hard, it was painful, but it was temporary. And that's what we're promised. We're not promised an easy time. If your life is easy as a Christian, you're doing it wrong. You might have heard that one other time, haven't you? We will go through difficulties. That's one of the things we're promised. In this life, there will be trials, there will be troubles, there will be struggles, there will be difficulties. But what we're promised is that those things will be temporary. We will eventually be delivered in this life or the next. And in the next, everything in this life will be given a bigger picture. And we'll see the glory that comes from it. And now here we come into the connection to Christmas. We have this hope and this promise of deliverance specifically because of Jesus. Verses 6 through 8, right here. Burnt offerings and sin offering you have not required. Then I said, behold, I have come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me, I delight to do your will, O my God, your law is within my heart. So verse 6 sort of comes out of the blue here. And this is an idea that is as in your face to the Jews as it could possibly be. Sacrifices and burnt offerings don't really please God. He doesn't really want them. Well, then why does he command them? These people would travel for days at a time across the nation of Israel every year so they can go stand in long lines in the temple and spend their money and their hard-earned resources as a sacrifice to God. And he doesn't really care? So why does he require it? Why is it in the law? Why is it there? Well, the book of Hebrews covers this a lot, so I'd invite you, if you're inclined to flip over to there. We're going to look a little bit here in Hebrews chapter 10, where he centers on this idea. Hebrews 10, verse 1. For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come. I'll stop right there. This is the key, and this is what the Jews missed. The law wasn't the thing. It was what pointed ahead to the thing. And that thing was Jesus. The law was a shadow of the good thing, Jesus, that would come. Instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near. The sacrifices couldn't bring forgiveness. They couldn't bring redemption. They couldn't make us perfect. Because our sin is an offense against God, and you think killing a sheep is going to do anything against that? That sheep is not that special. I mean, they're cute and fluffy, but it's not that fancy. Otherwise, would they not have ceased to be offered, since the worshippers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have any consequence of sin? But in these sacrifices there was a reminder of sins every year, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. So they were a reminder. A reminder, like those festivals, like the names that we saw, like the memorials that are set up, they are reminders to people that we are sinners. And that sin brings with us the penalty of death. We've talked about this before. When they would give these offerings, you'd bring in the sheep. One priest would hold that sheep's head up. And the family would come and they'd lay their hands on the sheep while its throat is slit. As a reminder that that death is for you. That blood is being shed so that your blood isn't. But that sheep's blood does not purify us, does not cleanse us, does not forgive us of our sins. But it's a symbol of something that's coming. Consequently, when Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifices and burnt offerings you have not desired. This is where we're back in that psalm. But a body you have prepared for me. In burnt offerings and sin offerings you've taken no pleasure. Then I said, behold, I have come to do your will, O God, as it is written of me in the scroll of the book. When he said above, you have neither desired nor taken pleasure in sacrifices and offerings and burnt offerings and sin offerings. These are offered according to the law. Then he added, behold, I have come to do your will. He does away with the first in order to establish the second. And by that, will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. See, with Christ came this new covenant. The old covenant had fulfilled its purpose. It pointed ahead to him. The old law was there to prepare the way for Jesus. And when he came and when he did the work that he was here to do, living a perfect life, dying a sacrificial death, rising again, we now have hope for deliverance. To be pulled up out of that miry clay, out of that bog, set on a firm ground. In order to receive that, we need to do what the psalmist does. Submit ourselves to the will of God and do what God has called us to do. Or in other words, deliver. And that's the theme that we see echoed in verses 11 through 12 in Psalms. As for you, O Lord, you will not restrain your mercy from me. Your steadfast love and your faithfulness will ever preserve me. God will not withhold his mercy. He will deliver us from evil, even from ourselves. Forgiveness has been offered to us, and all we have to do is cry out for it. We can receive it. And when we do that, we're sanctified. It means we're forgiven, we're cleansed, we're saved. No matter what our background is, no matter what is in the past, we can be released from it and forgiven for it. All through the sacrifice of Jesus. And when we do that, we can be, we should be, we must be brought then to the third part, the third theme that we see in this psalm. The theme of action. Verse 3, he put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Even this, though, is God enabled. He puts the song in our mouths, one of praise and thanksgiving to a gracious and merciful God that's done all of this for us. That he transforms our lives. He makes us new. And people will see that, and they will fear the Lord. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Fear the Lord. And they'll put their trust in him because of what they've seen him do in us and through us. But that can only happen if we are transformed, if we are changed from our old into a new. It can only happen if our praise really is on our tongues, meaning we're actually talking about him. This is one of those things a lot of times we can sit there and go, yeah, And then we think about it, we realize how little we actually talk about God. How little that really comes out in our lives. I mean, how can we not, if we've recognized that we've been pulled up from that pit, from the depths of that well, from hopelessness, and put back in the bright sunny day, on a firm foundation, on a rock that's not going to move under our feet? How can we not talk about that? Too often, we've forgotten what God has done for us. Christmas is a celebration that ends up getting filled with presents and food and this obligation to go to church. And then that's it. But it can't just be that. We celebrate it for a reason. It's a memorial centered on Christ. That's what it was put there for. That's what it's intended to be, to remind us, for us to remember that we have hope for deliverance because of Him. Because God humbled Himself to the point of becoming a servant to His own creation in order to fix the horrible mistake that we made, that He had nothing to do with, simply because He loves us and He wants to be in relationship with us. When we recognize what God has done, the gift of our salvation, the many moments in our lives that we have been delivered from these different trials and struggles, both big and small, then we should just shout it from the rooftop, shouldn't we? Verse 9. I've told the glad news of deliverance in the great congregation. Behold, I have not restrained my lips, as you know, O Lord. I have not hidden your deliverance within my heart. I have spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I have not concealed your steadfast love and your faithfulness from the great congregation. So don't conceal your thanksgiving, your praise. Don't hold back your joy. Let thankfulness and joy mark your lives and flow from you, pointing others to the great and mighty God of all creation. And in closing, verse 16. May all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation say continually, great is the Lord. Father, we thank you for your word, and we thank you for the promise of deliverance that you've given us. And I pray that we would live in that hope. I pray that we would live in joy, knowing that no matter what we're going through, it will be temporary, because in the end, you will come and you will right all wrongs, you will heal all hurts. That we are forgiven simply because we are loved. And all we have to do is love you. Confess with our mouth Jesus is Lord. Believe in our heart that God raised Him from the dead and we will be saved. I pray that that would be on our minds and on our hearts, and that would drive us through each and every day. And that it would move us to action. And that action would impact our community, would impact the people around us, that we would see lives change because of what you are doing. Be with us in this new year. I pray that that will be on our hearts throughout each and every day. In your name we pray. Amen.